I never thought I'd see it. A tiny German Shepherd puppy, shivering and frostbitten, standing nose to nose with a massive moose on the frozen road near Baxter State Park, Maine. I slammed the brakes. The truck skidded slightly, tires crunching the thin layer of snow and ice, and I just sat there, hands frozen on the wheel, heart thudding. The scene in front of me didn't make sense. The moose was massive, easily over 1,000 pounds, antlers like a crown of jagged branches, and right in front of him stood this little pup, fur matted, legs trembling, one paw lifted slightly off the ice like it hurt to put it down. He wasn't barking, wasn't whining, just standing there, like he belonged, like he was waiting for me. My name's Ethan Cole. I'm 44, volunteer search and rescue out here in the North Woods. I've seen a lot over the years, injured hikers, missing campers, even a bear cub stuck in a culvert. But never this. Never a baby German Shepherd puppy and a moose together. I opened the truck door slowly, boots crunching down as I stepped onto the shoulder. The moose didn't flinch. His dark eyes flicked to me, then back to the puppy. There was a calm about him like he knew what he was doing. The puppy turned his head. That's when I saw it. The raw skin on his nose, the frostbite along his ears, and those eyes. Big, dark, and desperate. He was only a few months old, sable-coated, with tufts of darker fur over his back and lighter patches near his chest. But he looked like he'd aged a lifetime out here. I took one step closer. The moose snorted. Not a warning, more like a signal. Then, without a sound, he stepped back into the trees. Vanished, like fog. The puppy didn't move. I crouched low, holding out a gloved hand. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" My voice cracked. Something about him, it hit me deeper than I expected. Maybe it was the way he stood so still, like he didn't expect kindness anymore. He didn't come to me, but he didn't run either. Just watched, like he was trying to figure out if I was real. I edged closer, whispering soft words. "You're safe now. I've got you." When I reached him, I saw the crusted blood on his paws, the ice stuck to the fur under his belly. He'd been out here a while. Too long. I scooped him up carefully, wrapping my jacket around his fragile body. He was colder than snow. I felt his heartbeat. Fast. Shallow. But just as I turned back to the truck, I felt a shift. The puppy squirmed weakly in my arms and looked over my shoulder, toward the trees, toward where the moose had gone. And then, with the softest whimper, he reached a paw out into the air, toward the woods. I paused on the icy shoulder, still holding him tight. His paw hung in the air, trembling, pointed at the tree line where the moose had disappeared. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see those towering antlers again, but the forest was silent. No movement, just wind brushing through the pines. But the puppy kept reaching, like he wasn't done, like something or someone was still out there. "I hear you, little guy," I murmured, adjusting him against my chest, "but you need help first." I carried him to the truck, cranked the heat, and laid him gently on the old flannel jacket I kept on the passenger seat. His breathing was thin, shallow. Frostbite along his ears had turned the tips gray. The pads of his paws were split from the ice. He was in pain, but silent about it, no crying, just those dark eyes watching every move I made. I started the drive back toward the ranger station, but a few miles in, he stirred again, tried to sit up, failed. Then turned his body toward the passenger side window and pressed a paw against it, nose tapping the cold glass. He looked back at me with something that wasn't panic, but urgency. "You want to go back?" I asked. No answer, obviously, but he kept staring at the trees as they passed by. Every time we hit a clearing, he'd lift his head, searching. "Okay," I said finally, pulling over near the trailhead where I'd first spotted them. "We do this your way." I parked, popped the back, and wrapped him in a thick emergency blanket. His body was so light I barely felt the weight. Snow crunched underfoot as we stepped into the forest. The sun had dipped just slightly, casting long shadows between the trunks. Every part of me said this was crazy, but something in his eyes, this instinct, kept me moving. We didn't go far, maybe a few hundred yards. Then he squirmed again. I knelt to let him down, expecting him to collapse. Instead, he found his footing, shaky but determined, and limped toward a thicket of spruce trees. And that's when I saw it. Broken branches, flattened snow, hoof prints the size of dinner plates, still fresh. Moose tracks, circling a spot like he'd been pacing, and in the center something worse. A snare, old, rusted, torn loose from a post, bits of fur stuck to the metal, blood stains frozen into the snow. The puppy stopped a few feet short of it, his ears lowered. He whimpered softly, then sat, staring at that spot. My heart sank. He wasn't just wandering, he'd been trying to bring me here all along. Lucan whimpered and pressed his nose into the snow, pawing at the ground with slow, shaky movements. His tail lay flat, unmoving. I crouched beside him, and the cold bit through my jeans as I brushed the snow away with my gloves. Underneath, I found patches of fur, soft, and the same sable coloring as his. Just a few clumps, frozen into the ice like the memory of someone who'd been there too long. My stomach turned. I looked around, scanning the flattened snow, the twisted snare, the broken branches overhead. There were no other prints besides Lucan's and the moose's. No smaller tracks, no blood trails leading out, just silence. I didn't want to believe it. But every part of the scene screamed the same truth. He wasn't alone out here. Not at first. Lucan let out a soft cry, barely more than breath, and began digging again, faster this time. He didn't know when to stop. His paw hit something hard beneath the snow and scraped it raw, but he didn't stop. He was desperate, searching. "Hey," I said, putting a hand on his back. He froze under my touch. His head turned just enough to glance at me, then back to the snow. I don't know how long he'd been waiting here. A day? 2? Long enough for his sibling to disappear. Long enough for the moose to step in. I stood slowly, my knees aching from the cold. My breath came out in clouds. Who would do this? Who looks at a pair of puppies and thinks, bait? I'd seen some terrible things in these woods, illegal traps, poisoned meat left for predators, but this felt worse, colder, more personal. This wasn't just a snare meant to catch an animal. This was a message from someone who had no heart at all. Lucan sat down in the snow again, his chest rising and falling, his ears folded back. His eyes didn't leave the thicket. The moose had been circling this spot, guarding it. I pictured it, that enormous creature standing between Lucan and whatever danger had come through here. A natural sentinel, not because he understood, but because he felt. Some instinct, some invisible thread tying these lives together. I knelt beside the puppy and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I wish I'd been there sooner." He didn't move, didn't look at me, just kept watching the woods, as if he still believed something might come back. The walk back to the truck was quiet. Lucan didn't fight me this time when I scooped him up. He just lay against my chest, his head turned toward the woods, eyes still fixed on the trees until they vanished behind us. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. That snare, the fur, the way the moose had circled that exact spot like a living shield. It didn't feel like coincidence. It felt deliberate, like something ancient and wild had stepped in where humanity had failed. Back at the ranger station, I laid Lucan on a heated blanket by the wood stove. He didn't sleep, just curled up tight and stared into the flames. I watched him as I called the vet in Millinocket and arranged for an emergency visit. As the fire popped and crackled, I caught myself whispering, "You held on, buddy. You made it." But even as I said it, I could feel the weight in his body, like part of him was still out there in that clearing. The drive to the vet was long, winding through snow-covered roads and bare trees. Lucan stayed awake the whole way, head resting on the seat, eyes flicking toward every shadow out the window. At the clinic, the vet's face tightened when he saw him. "He's lucky," Dr. Harlow said. "Frostbite on both ears, pads cracked and raw. He'll heal, but he's been out there for days, maybe longer." "Someone left him," I said flatly. Dr. Harlow glanced up. "You think it was intentional?" "I don't think. I know." Lucan flinched as the vet cleaned one of his paws, but he didn't snap or whine, just stared into the distance, silent. That night, I took him home. Couldn't bring myself to leave him at the shelter, not after what he'd been through. I set up a space in the corner of my cabin, blankets, food, a soft old toy I kept from a previous foster pup. Lucan sniffed it once and then ignored it. He walked to the sliding glass door, sat down, and stared out into the darkness. There were stars, so many stars over the woods, and I wondered what he was waiting for. The next morning, just after dawn, I found him pawing at the edge of the door. Not frantic, just insistent, focused. "You want to go back, don't you?" His ears perked slightly at my voice. I bundled us both up and we returned to the same trail, boots crunching through the frozen crust. Lucan walked slowly, but every step was precise. He knew the way. And then, just past the thicket, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A broken trail marker, and beneath it, a collar, torn. I picked it up. It was too small to be Lucan's. The collar was frayed along the edges, the nylon stiff with cold and time. The tag had been scratched beyond reading, but I could still make out the faint outline of a paw print charm, dangling uselessly from the rusted ring. I turned it over in my gloved hands, my breath caught in my throat. It was pink. Lucan stood beside me, nose twitching, ears alert. He didn't try to take the collar, just watched me, as if he remembered exactly what it was, as if it still mattered. "You had a sister," I whispered. He took a slow step forward and sniffed the ground near my boots, then looked up at me with those deep, unreadable eyes, and something in my chest cracked open. I felt it. Not just sadness, but this hollow guilt I couldn't quite explain. I hadn't even known her, but I could feel her absence like a shadow pressed between the trees. I slipped the collar into my jacket pocket, not because it belonged to me, but because Lucan shouldn't be the one to carry it. We stayed in that clearing for a long time, surrounded by nothing but quiet. Snow began falling, soft, steady flakes drifting down like ash. Lucan sat beside me, tail curled around his paws, head tilted toward the open woods. He didn't whimper anymore. He was waiting. Maybe for the moose. Maybe for something he knew I couldn't see. I scanned the tree line, hoping for a sign. A silhouette, a breath of movement, nothing. But that didn't mean the moose wasn't out there. Back at the cabin, I lit the stove again and settled Lucan near the heat. He lay down but didn't sleep. Just watched the flames like they were trying to tell him something. I opened my laptop and started writing a report. I couldn't ignore what I'd found. The snare, the bait, the remains of something darker behind those trees. Maybe it was poachers. Maybe just someone cruel. But someone had set a trap, not for meat, not for food, but to lure something bigger. Wolves, maybe, or the moose. I remembered the pattern of his tracks, not random, protective. He'd been pacing that area, guarding it, guarding Lucan. I looked over at the puppy again. He was curled tighter now, eyes barely open, but I could still see the flicker of tension in his body. He wasn't just recovering. He was waiting for me to understand, to figure out what the moose already knew. 2 days passed. Lucan barely moved from the window. He'd eat, drink, even tolerate the warm compresses I used on his cracked paws. But every morning he'd return to the same spot by the glass door, nose resting against the lower frame, watching the tree line like he was listening for something only he could hear. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing a piece of the story. The snare, the bait, the collar. Someone had left them out there. Not randomly, not accidentally. They'd lured in those pups like tools, disposable. And yet, Lucan had survived. Why? How? On the third morning, I decided to go back one more time. The snow had crusted overnight, hard-packed and glistening in the sunlight. I wrapped Lucan in his blanket, loaded him into the truck, and we headed toward the clearing. When I parked, he was already alert, head up, eyes scanning the trail ahead. He didn't whimper, didn't bark, just stared. I carried him through the trees, my boots creaking in the cold. We reached the snare site, now partially buried again under new snowfall. I was about to turn back when Lucan shifted in my arms. A low, anxious growl rumbled in his throat. I followed his gaze and saw it. More than a dozen yards past the thicket, almost hidden beneath a downed pine, was a second snare. Newer, untouched. And next to it, a pile of raw meat, frozen stiff, tied to a metal stake. Bait. Fresh bait. My jaw clenched. Someone had been back. Maybe even recently. And they were still trying to catch something. Lucan whimpered and tucked his head under my chin. That's when I realized this wasn't just about him. It never had been. He hadn't led me here to show me where he'd been. He'd been trying to warn me. To warn someone. The moose hadn't been protecting Lucan alone. He'd been guarding the woods. This exact spot. From whatever predator or person kept returning. I set Lucan down gently and walked toward the trap. My hands shook as I took photos, GPS coordinates, everything I'd need to file a formal report with the rangers and state authorities. Back at the truck, Lucan looked at me, eyes steady, like he knew, like he understood. On the drive home, I kept glancing at him in the mirror. He wasn't just a rescued puppy anymore. He was a witness. And somewhere out there, the moose was still watching too. The first time Lucan wagged his tail, it caught me off guard. It was just a flick, barely there. But it happened as I was tightening his new boots over the bandaged pads of his paws. I'd spent the last 2 days letting him rest, trying to coax a little more light into those eyes. The wounds were healing, his appetite had returned, but his heart, that was still deep in those woods. I clipped the leash onto his harness, and he didn't resist. No limp, no tension. Just that same quiet focus. He walked beside me to the truck, hopped in without hesitation, and sat facing the windshield, waiting. Something had shifted. The trail was quiet that morning, no fresh snow, no tracks, but Lucan didn't hesitate. He led. Nose low, ears alert, eyes scanning. We moved past the old snares, past the clearing where the pink collar had been buried, deeper into the pines where the trees closed in tighter. My radio crackled once on my belt, then died, out of range. I stopped to check the map, but Lucan kept going. He pulled lightly on the leash, not frantic, just sure. "You remember this way?" I asked. He paused, looked back at me, and I swear he nodded. We came upon a narrow game trail, barely wide enough for a deer, but it had been used. The snow was disturbed in long, dragging patterns. No boot prints, just something large. Moose. Lucan perked up, his body tensed, not in fear, but anticipation. The trail curved, then opened into a small glade I'd never seen before. Soft light filtered through the trees, catching on frost that clung to the branches like silver threads. It was quiet, peaceful. Lucan froze. And then I saw them. Fresh hoof prints, giant, round, deep. They crossed the glade and circled a fallen log near the center. Tufts of brown hair clung to the bark, and the snow around it had been disturbed, not violently, but carefully, like something had laid there. Guarded it. Lucan stepped forward and sat beside the log, calm, still, like he was home. I took off my gloves, knelt beside him, and whispered, "He was here, wasn't he?" Lucan didn't look at me, just stared at the prints. His tail thumped once against the snow. Then, somewhere deep in the trees ahead, I heard it. A low rustle. Heavy, deliberate. Something was moving through the forest, something big. The sound stopped. The forest fell silent again, too silent. No birdsong, no wind, not even the creak of branches. Just that waiting kind of quiet, like the woods were holding their breath. Lucan didn't move. His ears were up now, eyes locked in the direction of the rustle. He wasn't afraid. If anything, he looked expectant. I stood slowly, my breath visible in the cold. My hand rested lightly on his back, and I could feel the tension running through him. Not panic, but purpose. Then, just beyond the far side of the glade, the brush shifted again. A shape emerged between the trees. Dark. Massive. The moose. He stepped into view like he'd been there all along, just waiting for us to arrive. His head moved slowly, turning toward us. His antlers looked even wider in the daylight, each point edged with frost. He didn't stomp or snort, didn't show any threat, just stood there, staring. Lucan didn't bark, didn't growl. He walked forward 2 slow steps, then sat down again, facing the moose directly. I held my breath. The moose didn't retreat. He stayed exactly where he was, watching. Lucan blinked once, then made a low sound in his throat. Not a whine, more like a soft sigh, a breath of memory. And then I realized this wasn't the first time they'd seen each other here. This was their place, the log, the glade, the trail. Lucan had been here before, maybe with his sister. Maybe the moose had watched them both, guarded them while no one else would. Now he was back, to show me, to say goodbye. I didn't dare move. The moose gave one long, slow blink, then turned. He moved off through the trees, each step deliberate and quiet. No panic, no rush. Lucan didn't follow. He just sat there, eyes on the space where the moose had been, ears twitching slightly as the last sounds faded. I knelt beside him. "You brought me here for a reason," I whispered. He leaned gently against my leg. The air shifted. I felt it, not cold exactly, but deeper, like something unseen had passed between us and left behind a quiet truth. This wasn't just about survival. It was about trust, about memory, about a bond formed in silence and snow. Lucan stood, shook out his fur, and looked up at me. And for the first time since I found him, he wagged his tail without hesitation. On the hike back, Lucan didn't pull ahead like before. He walked beside me, calm, grounded, like something inside him had settled. His ears still flicked at every sound, but his steps were steady now, no more searching glances over his shoulder. We weren't escaping the forest this time. We were leaving something behind, or maybe honoring it. Back at the truck, he leapt into the passenger seat without a sound and curled up like he always belonged there. I sat behind the wheel for a while without turning the key, just watching him breathe. His ribs rose and fell in a quiet rhythm, and I realized This little German Shepherd puppy had been through more in 5 months than most dogs go through in a lifetime. And yet he trusted me. That night, as the wood stove crackled and the snow started falling again, I pulled up the photos I'd taken out there, the traps, the bait pile, the collar. I sent everything to the ranger office along with my report, but I kept one picture for myself. Lucan, sitting by that fallen log, staring at the moose with a kind of reverence I still didn't fully understand. I printed it and tacked it to the fridge, a reminder, not of the danger, but of the grace that still exists in the wild, even when humans fail to see it. Over the next week, Lucan healed fast. The burns on his paws closed over, the dullness in his coat began to lift. And something else changed too. He started sleeping through the night. He'd curl up in the same spot by the stove, and when I woke in the morning, he'd already be waiting by the door, not anxious, not panicked, just ready. We began training in short sessions, sit, stay, recall, simple stuff. But Lucan was different from the other rescues I'd worked with. He wasn't just obedient, he was aware, hyper-focused, tuned into every movement, every sound, like he'd never stopped surviving. Like he'd just learned how to do it quietly. And that's when the idea started, search and rescue. I'd worked with teams before, volunteered during storms and wilderness recoveries. And Lucan, he had the mind, the instinct, the heart. But more than that, he had a reason. Because he knew what it was like to be lost out there, to wait for help that never came. Until one day it did. Until that day it was a moose. And then it was me. The first snowfall of January blanketed the woods like a memory. That morning, I loaded Lucan into the truck with his new vest, bright orange with a stitched patch on the side, in training, search and rescue. He looked proud in it, or maybe I just wanted him to be. Either way, he sat straighter, watched the road with quiet intensity like he knew where we were headed before I did. I hadn't planned to go back. But something about that day, the stillness, the weight of the sky, it pulled us north again, toward the old trail, toward that hidden glade that still lived in both of us. We reached the spot just after noon. The sun was low, gold filtering through bare branches, and the snow crunched sharp beneath our boots. Lucan didn't bark, he didn't lead. He just stood beside me, eyes scanning the clearing. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then a shadow passed between the trees, slow, towering, quiet as falling snow, the moose. He stepped out from the brush like he'd never left. Not startled, not curious, just there, like a sentinel, like this place still mattered to him. Lucan froze beside me, but not from fear. He looked up at the moose, ears forward, tail still, and slowly sat down in the snow. Just like before, no command, no prompt. I didn't speak either. I couldn't. The moose lowered his head slightly, just once, then turned and walked into the trees. No drama, no farewell, just a final, no, silent acknowledgement. Lucan didn't chase, didn't whine. He watched until the last branch stopped swaying. Then he stood, turned toward me, and walked to my side. Something passed between them in that moment I'll never understand. Some thread of memory, of respect, between a wild creature and a puppy who should have never survived. But he did. Because the wild can be cruel, but sometimes it chooses mercy. And when no human would protect him, the forest sent its quietest giant to stand watch. I ran my hand through Lucan's fur and whispered, "You're not just a survivor, buddy. You're a guardian now." And I knew that chapter was closed, but his real story was just beginning. 6 months later, Lucan's name was on everyone's lips, not because of his past, but because of what he'd become. He passed his certification on the first try, obedience, scent tracking, victim location. Every test he faced, he crushed it with quiet precision. The instructors were stunned by his focus, said they'd never seen a pup that young carry himself like that, like he already knew what was at stake. Maybe he did. His first real mission came after a summer thunderstorm rolled through Piscataquis County. A child had gone missing while camping with their family near the edge of the park. The team was already combing the woods by the time we arrived. Lucan jumped out of the truck, nose high, eyes scanning, body coiled but calm. I clipped on his vest. He turned to me, waiting for the cue. "Find," I whispered. He was gone in seconds, through thickets, across ravines, under fallen limbs. I followed his bright vest like a beacon, and then he stopped, barked once, sharp and clear. We found her under a collapsed tarp, soaked and scared, but alive. Lucan sat beside her and leaned gently into her side until she stopped crying. From that moment on, he wasn't just a rescue dog. He was a hero. His story traveled fast. Local papers ran headlines. From abandoned to essential, German Shepherd puppy saves lost child in first week on duty. Photos circulated, one in particular. Lucan standing tall in his vest, a dirt-smudged little girl hugging his neck, and behind them, the edge of the same woods where he was once left behind. I taped that photo right below the first one, the one with the moose, side by side, the beginning and now. Every time I look at them, I remember that tiny pup I found shivering on the road, the way he refused to give up, the way the wild didn't abandon him even when people did, and how now, every time he runs into those woods, it's not to escape, it's to bring someone else back. Sometimes the ones left behind become the ones who save. Lucan wasn't just a German Shepherd puppy rescued from the snow. He was a reminder that even in a world that can be heartless, compassion still exists, sometimes in the most unexpected places. A moose guarded a lost puppy when no human would. And that puppy? He grew into a guardian, not just of people, but of hope. Lucan taught me that real strength isn't loud. It's quiet, it's patient, it stands beside the fallen, it waits in the trees, and when the time comes, it acts. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Because behind every injured puppy is a chance to change a life, to save one, to give back more than we ever expect. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love, it's responsibility, it's pet care, it's choosing to be the voice they didn't have when they were left alone in the cold. Lucan is still out there, leading search teams into the wilds of Maine, and every time he steps into the forest, he carries a story with him. Not just of survival, but of silent loyalty, of animals protecting animals, of a German Shepherd and a moose, and the strange, beautiful connection between them. If this story moved you, share it, because when we share stories like Lucan's, we don't just spread awareness, we spread action. We remind the world that abandoned animals deserve more than pity. They deserve a chance. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.